In this edition of the News Review, Tehran has warned that the 2015 nuclear deal will die forever if Washington circumvents the UN Security Council Resolution 2231 to keep the Iran weapons sanctions in place. In a tweet, Secretary of Iran's National Security Council urged the European partners to the nuclear deal not to support the U.S. attempt to extend the Iran arms embargo beyond 2021. Ali Shamkhani, that was 2020. Ali Shamkhani suggested that Europeans' support will be accepting humiliation and unilateralism. A week ago, the U.S. raised criticism by saying that it remains a party to the nuclear deal and can trigger snapback of UN sanctions on Iran. The move is aimed at pressuring the Security Council to extend the arms embargo on Tehran, which is due to expire in October. Now, to discuss that more, we're joined by Mr. Marcus Papadopoulos, editor of Politics First, joining us live from London. And of course, we're also joined by Mr. John Stepling, author and commentator from Norway. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Let's start with Mr. Papadopoulos. Now, do you believe that the Europeans will give in to pressure coming from the United States, especially at this point in time? They have so far resisted by trying to back Iran in the nuclear deal.
Well, it is evident that Washington is of the conviction that its decision in 2018 to withdraw from the JCPOA has failed to land a fatal blow to the deal. Because what we have seen in the last 2 years is the JCPOA continue to limp on. And I use the word limp on because as a result of America's decision to withdraw from the JCPOA, the deal did become gravely weakened. Nonetheless, it has limped on. It has not died as policymakers in Washington had hoped for. And indeed, far from having died, in recent weeks, the JCPOA received a considerable boost to its very existence, namely when the Europeans, the Germans, the French and the British, activated the Instex trading system, which has allowed Iran to import medicines and also medical equipment. So the Americans, 2 years on from their decision to withdraw as a party from the Iran nuclear deal, are looking at the deal as one that continues to survive despite it having withdrawn itself from the deal. So the Americans now are resorting to other means to undermine and effectively destroy, decapitate the deal. Namely, they are attempting to play the Europeans, the British, the French and the Germans off against the Iranians in the hope that the Europeans will comply with the immense pressures which are being leveled on them by the Americans, and therefore Iran will take it in its own, will take it as a decision that it has no longer any trust in the Europeans, and therefore Iran could very well withdraw from the deal. And that would be an absolute catastrophe if American attempts to undermine and destroy the Iran nuclear deal were to materialize, because the JCPOA is a cornerstone in attempting to create a level of peace and stability and trust in the Middle East. So the eyes of the Middle East, and indeed the world in general, are on the Europeans to resist this pressure. And I think anyone around the world who wants to see peace and stability in the Middle East should support this. And they should also acknowledge and understand that America is attempting to wreck the JCPOA because America wants a free hand to try and overthrow the Iranian government and destroy the Iranian revolution. Why? Because Iran prays to a god. Iran does not pray to money. Iran does not pray to materialism. And Iran does not pray to this depraved and deformed and dangerous liberal concept in the West of human rights.
Thank you very much, Mr. Papadopoulos. Let's bring in Mr. John Steppling from Norway. Mr. Steppling, well, what is your opinion? On the one hand, well, we saw Donald Trump, as soon as he took office, withdrawing, saying those words, that he is withdrawing from the JCPOA. Now we have Mike Pompeo saying that they are still part of the JCPOA, contradicting the president, and then trying to use this as a leverage in order to keep sanctions on Iran.
Well, the president's men contradict him all the time. Pompeo is a rabid Islamophobe. He's a Christian zealot, a dominionist, and he hates Islam, and he makes no secret of this. But there's a bigger question if we go back, and that has to do with why there was ever a JCPOA in the first place. I mean, who decided that Iran was a villain that needed to be monitored? I mean, Israel's not monitored, Pakistan, India. I mean, suddenly this is a subject for the global powers to ruminate about, because Iran is in the minds of people like Mike Pompeo and much of Washington, a rogue state somehow. What they are is disobedient. They don't do the bidding of Washington. They don't do the bidding of Western capital. Therefore, they are seen as intransigent and difficult. And in terms of world economic institutions, the World Bank and so forth, Iran is a pain for them. You know, they don't do what they're told. But why, in the minds of Washington, Iran and the UN, why Iran is not allowed to have nuclear weapons? Other countries do. Who determines that? Where did that decision originally come from? It seems very strange to me.
Mr. Steppling, I'm very sorry to cut you off, but since you mentioned that, the arms embargo is traditional, conventional arms, actually. It has nothing to do with nuclear weapons. Why should Iran be under such an embargo?
Well, I mean, indeed, all of these questions are extremely relevant, and they never get answered or addressed. But this is American exceptionalism at work, in a sense. And the U.S. decides what countries are fit for they've sanctioned Venezuela, they've sanctioned Syria, they've sanctioned all kinds of places, Iran, and it's because of their own interests, not global peace or stability. It's purely a matter of what is in at least in the minds of Washington, what is in their best interest. But of course, why is Iran singled out for these kinds of restrictions? They've done nothing. You know, that all said, Iran has bent over backwards to fulfill its obligations on this. They met every criteria that was set up for them in terms of the JCPOA. And all the inspectors have said that. Nobody seems to be arguing about that. It is only Mike Pompeo. And it may be that Mike Pompeo has only told the truth once, and that was at Texas A&M, where he said he learned to lie and cheat at the CIA, that they had courses in it. So that should probably tell you something. Pompeo's a dangerous man. He's an extremist, and he's calling a lot of the shots in terms of foreign policy now for Washington, because God knows Trump doesn't know where Iraq is or Iran is on a map. But I don't know what Europe's going to do. Mr. Papadopoulos is probably more optimistic than I am, but I hope he's right, and that Europe will continue to find ways to trade with Iran and circumvent U.S. diktats. But given the global depression that's going to come out of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's hard to know what's going to happen. That's going to change a lot of priorities and evaluations in all of this, and certainly in terms of trade and for things like oil, it's going to be a recalibration of priorities, I think, and it's very hard to predict how that will go. But at a certain point, I just think the whole thing is a moot point, because the U.S. hates international law. They have contempt for it. So it really doesn't matter what they say, because they're going to do what they want anyway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stepling. We have about 2 minutes left, so I would like each of you to give me 1 minute to talk about this 1 minute, actually. Mr. Papadopoulos, well, Iran has been very clear that the JCPOA will be dead if the U.S. moves forward with this embargo. What do you think will happen? What is your prediction?
Well, Iran has fully complied with the JCPOA since the deal came into existence. It is the other parties to the JCPOA who have either failed or who have, in some cases, abided by the requirements of the deal. The Americans withdrew, and despite what the imbecile Mike Pompeo asserts, America is no longer a signatory to the deal. The Europeans, in some instances, have complied with the deal, but in others have failed to comply. Iran is a self-respecting country, and the #1 obligation of the Iranian government is to ensure the security of Iran and the security of the Iranian people. And if it is no longer in the interests of Iran to remain a party to the deal, if it is not conducive to the security of Iran and the well-being of the Iranian people, then of course Iran has no choice but to withdraw. That would not be Iran's fault. That would be the principal fault of America and the inability of the Europeans to resist American pressure. Though I say the inability of the Germans and the French, the British you always have to be very, very cautious about because of the special relationship between London and Washington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stepling.
In realistic terms, the JCPOA is dead. They may concoct a political theater one act where they sustain the pretense of manage the optics to make it seem as though this is alive. I don't fully understand Pompeo's comments the other day anyway. I don't know, because it had been clear that the U.S. tore up the agreement. As was mentioned, Iran has complied with everything. It's the U.S. that has not. But I emphasize again, the U.S. doesn't follow international law. They have contempt for it, and they're going to bring an enormous amount of pressure on Europe to do what they ask. And historically, Europe has folded to U.S. demands. So we'll see this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. John Stepling, author and commentator of Norway, and Mr. Marcus Papadopoulos, editor of Politics First from London. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your points of view and sharing that with us. And thanks to all our viewers for following this edition of the News Review.